I came to the exchange probably in one of the more unusual ways. I had spent 6 years in public accounting. My career was not going in the direction I wanted it to. The clients on whom I was working were not making me very happy. My father, who owned a small construction firm, had loved trading stocks. The love of his life was the stock market. And I decided that if I was going to change, I was going to leave green sheets of paper and try and move into this. And I tried, found some friends at the CBOE, and there was nothing there. At that point in time, I was married, 3 children, and a mortgage, and I was not able to work for $300 a month, which they wanted to offer me. 6 months later, they came to me and they said, well, we've got this guy. He's looking for an accountant. If you got enough chutzpah, you'll survive. And this guy was Ralph Peters. So I went to work for Ralph Peters. Having been on the consulting side of public accounting, I was working 70 hours a week. I went to work for Ralph and I worked 90 hours a week. I worked more all-nighters for Ralph than anybody that I've ever done in my life. Ralph would come in the morning and he would say, is it done? And I said, well, no, it's not done. And he would say, well, what were you doing between midnight and 4? I said, I was home asleep. And he goes, that's the wrong fucking answer. He said, when that bell rings, they're going to take the money away from me. You got to have these things done when I ask for them. So that was the rule of the day. Me and one other guy would work all night long to get these projects done for him. After a couple of years, he and I agreed to part ways, and I was trying to decide whether I was going to go back to Iowa, where I was raised, or do something here. And at that point in time, the CME was looking for a new head of their audit staff because they wanted to create a professional audit staff. They did not have a single CPA. I accepted the position, and my charge was to create a professional audit staff to monitor the finances of all the clearing firms, and my education in the industry began. While I was there, the Class B arbitrage was hot, and I started talking to a number of the banks about it. And a guy by the name of Gil Miller, who had G.H. Miller, had a couple of guys that had made $7 million trading their own account the year before, and they didn't want to do his little arbitrage anymore, and he needed someone to run it. And he wanted to expand it. So he came to me. I told him we could expand it because I knew the banks we could talk to. So I came to the trading floor as a member running a currency arbitrage, never having been on the floor, not knowing a thing. So the first thing I did was to hire a guy who was familiar with the floor, that had been down there, and so it began. Chicago Mercantile Exchange had made a deal with the different banks where that the firm was allowed to trade the FX at the bank as long as they offset it with the futures immediately. So they were hedged 100% of the time. And it was all a gambit by the CME to increase the volume of the currencies, which it did fairly dramatically. And as the volume of the currencies increased, suddenly the banks looked around and discovered there's money to be made here. So this was the beginning of the banks becoming clearing members, coming to the floor and putting their own people in to the currency pits to trade for the currency traders at the banks, which was pretty much the end of the Class B arbitrage. I attended Drake University. I got a Bachelor of Science degree in actuarial science. I then attended Drake. They had a new MBA program. I got an MBA with an area of concentration in accounting because I knew I didn't want to be an actuary. And then after getting my degree and concentration in accounting, I came to Chicago for one of the major CPA firms and became a CPA. I was given the opportunity by Chicago Corporation, who wanted to become a clearing member of the CME. And as part of that process, I got a membership, which I purchased, they backed, and I had to pledge it to Chicago Corporation, and I basically established Chicago Corporation's CME floor operation, and I mentored them through the process of becoming a clearing member at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. I ended up having a disagreement with Jack Wing. I walked away, took my membership. At that point in time, I had enough equity in it that I could get a backing from somebody else, and I went on from there. What I found was that I was certainly operating without a net because I came into the industry knowing no one. I had no financial backers, and so I was always acutely aware of my risk and the need to succeed and the need to move forward. So I would say there was a very high stress level involved. And what I did was I lifted weights, I worked out, I ran to burn off all the stress. I felt reasonably responsible having a family and a mortgage that I was not willing to get into alcohol or drugs or something like that because I couldn't lose the edge. I think that what it also allowed me to do was perhaps become more vocal. I'm well aware up to that time I was very soft-spoken, which doesn't work very well when you're on the trading floor, so I rather had to reach inside and find the big voice and protect my position and protect my spot and hold my ground. I guaranteed one person who was my clerk, and he became a successful trader. I had loaned money to a number of other people, but in terms of bringing people in, all 5 of my children are in the finance industry. What I would say, though, is they all watched me and what I went through as a trader, and every single one of them said, no, I don't want to trade because I don't want to go through the emotional swings and the trials and tribulations of the whole thing. So they're all in the futures and finance industry, but they're not traders. My family was incredibly supportive of me. My wife was always supporting of my decision to be a trader. My kids never expressed that they were unhappy that I had become a trader or anything like that. From their perspective, when they sit down and they say, well, when you were leaving Ralph Peters, you could have gone back to Iowa and become a hog farmer, or you could have become a trader. I think we'll take the trader. And I remember on Christmas Eve one year, I had a gentleman by the name of David Mykret that was a young, aggressive, great guy, wanted to do a great job, just a super guy. And he's standing there, and I'm standing in the back months, and this was after 1987, and I spent 2 or 3 years filling orders after 1987. And he says, they're asking me for a quote on a 125-lot strip in one of the back months. So it would be buying 4 separate months of 125 each. And at this point in time, that was a fairly big number. Okay, so I got a quote and there. And then he turns around and he says, buy them, buy them, buy them. So I bought 500 contracts in an illiquid back month. And he goes and reports them. And then he runs back to the desk. And then he comes back and he says, no, that's a mistake. It's a mistake. You got to break those. Well, I turned to the locals. And the local is your friend all stood there with their arms folded and said, I laid them off. I got nothing for you. There's nothing we can do. So David, on Christmas Eve, went around to all the desks of the New York traders and the New York people that were in the market and said, I've got a broker here. I made a mistake. We're stuck. Can you help us out? I got out on Christmas Eve for 1 to 2 tick loss. I was ecstatic. David felt horrible, but it was an incredible testament to how much they liked him. And I would like to believe it was a bit of a statement about me because they were willing to do it for me, but it was really David that they were helping out. And I mean, that's just a wonderful story for me. On the flip side, there was one time when I was trading and I had a clerk who I thought was a stable young man. Turns out that he had gone away to Wisconsin for the weekend, had been drinking most of the weekend, had driven from Wisconsin on Monday morning, comes into work, the market's flying, and I had done a 100-lot trade. He hadn't checked the trade and he hadn't added it to my position. And I discover it Tuesday morning, and it's a $50,000 immediate loss. That one hurt. I suggested to him that we should probably part ways. The trading floor is a microcosm of the world. You have the smartest people, and you have people that couldn't graduate from high school. You have the most ethical people, and you have people that have no ethics. You have people that are very well-mannered, and you have people that have no manners whatsoever. The beauty of the trading floor is there are no closed doors. It's all there for you to see. The great difference of the trading floor was the business was transacted right in front of you. It was you to interpret what was going on, but they couldn't hide it from you. Corporations can go behind closed doors and you have no idea what's going on. My view was on the trading floor, as a person standing on the floor all day long, you were never really going to know what the big guys were talking about, unless you were in that network, and I certainly wasn't. You had to look for the breadcrumbs. You had to look for the little indications along the way of what was happening and what was going on. There were wonderful people, there were horrible people. You had little, if any, choice as to who you stood by. Some days it was friends, and sometimes you ended up by complete assholes. There were guys that wouldn't wash their coat and it would stink to high heaven for the very great purpose of keeping people away from them. And there were other people that were just salt of the earth, phenomenal people. The economic opportunity on the trading floor was absolutely significant for people that were coming in with very little money, because at the time that I came in, and for a very long time, your risk was really measured and controlled by the people that stood around you, because it was measured at the end of every day. So if you had $10,000 in your account, you might trade like you had $50,000 or $100,000 in your account during the day and take risk that you would be far more than you would be allowed to take today, because of electronic trading is measuring it second by second or millisecond by millisecond. So the opportunity for someone to come in that didn't have the education. You don't have to be couth or bright or educated or anything else. You just have to know how to trade. And the point was, it's a completely different experience. I carried spreads, and I carried a fairly large spread position, and both were going my way. And I remember the euphoria of the money coming in, of making it, and just being lifted and feeling absolutely wonderful. I mean, I didn't make tens of millions of dollars, and I think what you find is that the further on you go, you can say somebody made $5 to $10 million 40 years ago, which was a huge number, and today people go, oh, well, that's nothing. You ought to make a couple hundred, then you'll be something. Well, in 10 years, it's going to be billions, right? So I don't measure it in terms of money, and I was never the uber successful trader anyway. I did well, but that was it. My worst day was probably the stock market crash of 1987. I had a very, very large position on, and basically I was short the front months of the Eurodollars and long a range of back months. And when it came out the day after the crash and the Fed loosed the interest rates, the front month went up 250 points and the back months went, what? That was my worst day. The man who cleared me at that point in time helped me get out of the position and allowed me to become a broker without blowing out my seat, because many of the people that I knew, the first thing the clearing firm did was to load their seats onto the market, which of course collapsed the value of the seats. And so they had a big debt to work off for a long time. And I was blessed that I could work my debt off and didn't have to worry about the membership. My trading style when I began was scalping and trying to take intermediate term positions, and I met a guy by the name of Rudy Vanderlaan, who introduced me to Chuck Noodleman, and they were spreaders in the back month of the Eurodollars. And Chuck Noodleman was probably probably one of the best spread traders in Eurodollars that ever existed. Quiet, methodical, didn't want the glory, didn't want the attention. He just kept doing what he was doing, and he was willing to let me listen in to his opinions and his ideas, and so I became a spread trader. And I found that the complexity of the spread trade among all of the different months was something that I really found interesting and challenging. I started too early for the futures options market. I think the futures options market was something that I truly would have enjoyed, but I was already cast as a futures trading guy when it began, and so never got over to the futures options side. When I first began, the CME gold contract was enormous. It was going crazy, and I got to see the collapse of that contract. The Eurodollar contract was nothing. Treasury bills were steaming, and Treasury bills collapsed, and Eurodollars became the biggest traded contract in the world. And I got to watch that from the very beginning and know the people that participated and watch its growth and then participate in it. I mean, what a wonderful experience. The creation of the stock market indices and the futures on that, and then the subsequent permission to cash settle. You may remember when the stock market indices started out, they had to settle in baskets of stock. What a mess. It really restricted the growth in the trade. And when there was permission to cash settle, which had previously considered gambling, and now they said, well, now you can cash settle these products, tremendous increase in the growth of that. The development of electronic trading, which really started as the clearing firms having electronic access to trade it overnight. And in the 80s, Leo was forecasting electronic trading was going to wipe out the trading floor by the mid-90s. I listened, and I absolutely believed it. It took a little longer, obviously, but I had created an upstairs trading group in the early 90s, and we just couldn't get anything done. And I ended up having to close it down after a year or two. You know, the losses were significant. We just couldn't get the edge and couldn't do it. I was on the floor for the FBI scandal. I had traded in the Japanese yen pit and had left to go over to the Eurodollars, and these FBI agents show up in the Japanese yen pit. I am blessed, what can I say? Because they came in with the expectation that they were going to trap the heads of the futures industry, the heads of the exchanges. And what did they catch? Nothing. They got a few guys who were trying to help them out, and cost them tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars, time in jail. It was a complete flop, and if it was a scandal, it was a scandal for the FBI, in my opinion. I was there, and I gotta tell you, it was an interesting time on the floor because everybody's looking at everybody else going, you work for the FBI? Is he an agent? Is he an agent? I don't remember. How long ago did he get here? Just amazing. When I was on the board, there was the drive for common clearing, where that the CME and the Board of Trade and the New York exchanges were all going to come together, and we would create one entity that would do clearing for all of them. And negotiations went on and on and on. Thank goodness the Board of Trade pulled out and the whole thing collapsed. Because without that, I'm not sure where the industry would be today, because the CME clearinghouse is absolutely the jewel of that enterprise. Being on the board of directors and participating in the discussions about becoming a publicly traded company. We brought in a number of large investment banking firms, and they made it very clear to us that the first exchange to go public would garner the vast majority of the value. Because they said, if you're a fund and you want exposure in the exchange traded space, and you own a piece of the CME, the Board of Trade or the New York Mercantile Exchange or coffee, sugar, cocoa, when they go public, you're not so interested because you already have exposure in that space. And that was one of the drivers for the CME to go ahead and become a public entity. I also think it was driven by the meat crowd of the CME who were owners who were by and large getting to a point of retirement and saw a significant opportunity to cash out. We had already had a proposal to come in and buy a piece of the CME, and they would take over management. Thank goodness nobody took that, because it's amazing to me the number of people that think they can come in and know how to run an exchange that have no idea whatsoever. It's a unique business, it really is, and traditional business practices I don't think work very well. When they were looking at going public, the older members saw that they could cash out at a multiple. They weren't certain about the futures. It was certainly going to be easier to distribute. And there was a very large belief at that point in time that I'll sell you the company, but I'm going to keep the membership and be able to keep trading. So I'm not really giving anything up. I'm just collecting a whole bunch of money on the side, and I'm not going to lose my trading rights, which didn't really mesh very well with the whole idea of electronic trading. But I believe the meets were one of the very last to go electronic, and that was their expectation and anticipation. The belief on the trading floor that electronic trading would not survive just continues to amaze me, because the guys on the desk, the guys that were talking in New York, were continually telling them, I need you guys, I need the information you provide. This is so important to me because, I just can't do without you guys. And in the Eurodollars, not 2 weeks before it flipped electronic, there was a big meeting where that they were reassured that it would never go electronic, and then it was gone. One other thing I would say about electronic trading, there was a great discussion while I was on the board to convince the members to allow electronic trading. And the representation was that 50% of all the members would be able to succeed trading electronically. We see in hindsight that percentage is probably 2%. So the number of jobs that were lost from electronic trading, beyond even the trading floor numbers in the thousands. I mean, the devastation that electronic trading has caused to the futures industry in Chicago cannot be underestimated. People that were making $100,000 a year working for $10 an hour. The people in the floor and on the floor believed that they were businessmen, that they had business skills, they had risk management skills, and they did, and they do. Corporate America doesn't trust them. Corporate America doesn't accept them. And what the trading floor had was non-transferable skills. Electronic trading also created the enormous volatility that we see, because the broker can't look down at a local and say, give me a bid. Doesn't happen. It did then. And the local would make the markets, and you had less volatility because of that. It's a trade-off. Everybody said we're going to have a level playing field. Level playing fields don't and will never exist.